thunderheads bruised the horizon when she stepped through the base gate. Rain-salted wind tugging the frayed cuff of a jacket no one had seen in 7 years. The guard at Checkpoint 1 didn't bother hiding his yawn until he looked up and saw her. For a beat he only blinked. Then his hand hovered over the emergency paddle, and his voice landed somewhere between professional and startled. "Ma'am, hold there," she held. She didn't speak. She didn't even nod. Her face was a map of roads with no names, clean but road-worn, dark hair blunt to her shoulders, slender frame carrying a backpack too heavy for its stitched seams. The patch on her sleeve was a faded ghost. The barcode on the bottom edge of her ID card had been scratched to useless silver. Identification. The guard tried again, softer. She set the card on the ledge beneath the ballistic glass. The card was older than some of the recruits who waited on cots beyond the screening arch. The guard slid it under the scanner and waited for the friendly chirp that never came. He frowned and peered through the glass at the small scar over her right eyebrow. The smooth knuckles, the posture tuned by 1,000 hours of instruction no one taught anymore. "You with the training rotation?" he asked. She looked past him, toward the parade square where a sea of orange vests bobbed around pallets of trauma kits, satellite phones, and clean water. To the left, the disaster response tower blinked a red light that meant the weather algorithm was unhappy. A black dog slept under the bleachers, muzzle on paws. One ear folded the wrong way. She lifted her hand in a small, calm open palm gesture that could have meant yes, could have meant wait. "Name?" He pressed. She didn't answer. Behind him, a second guard, older, with a weathered jaw, stood. His gaze moved as if comparing 2 photographs in his head and trying to match the light between them. "Arden," the older guard said to the younger. "Hit the archives." Arden's fingers danced the terminal. Lines of text scrolled. A list knuckled down the screen: clearances, rotations, training cohorts, and then stalled at a record encased in a gray box like a headstone. Here, date of death, 7 years prior. Name, Lyra Hale. He didn't say it out loud. He didn't need to. The older guard said it for him with a breath he couldn't keep quiet. "No way," he murmured. "They buried her." "I was there." Out on the square, a forklift beeped, backing toward the supply hangar. Rain flicked the asphalt. The woman lifted her pack higher on her shoulder, as if time itself had weight. Then she simply waited, eyes on the wind, while the alarm in the older guard's finger twitched and refused to press. They called a supervisor because that was what the manual said. The supervisor arrived with a clipboard, because that was what the manual also said, and answered the radio clip to her collar, with a tone that said she'd had 3 coffees, and none of them were enough. "What am I looking at?" The older guard angled his chin. The supervisor followed the angle and found a silent woman and an ancient ID. The supervisor did not believe in ghosts. She believed in data and schedules. "Escort her to intake," she said. "If she's legit, we'll get her processed. If she's not, the scanner will sing about it." The scanner did not sing. It wheezed. It coughed a file from an era when the compound had different fence lines and a different name. The photograph in the file was younger, less guarded, the mouth less careful. But the eyes were the same, and something like sorrow touched the supervisor's forehead before discipline smoothed it away. "Intake," she repeated, and the older guard nodded like a man who decided to believe. For now, in impossible things, they walked her through, hands respectfully off her elbows, because even a ghost deserves dignity. She kept pace, neither eager nor reluctant. She didn't speak to the nurse who offered water. She didn't flinch when a trainee carrying a crate clipped her shoulder and apologized too fast. She didn't look at the memorial wall where names were etched into steel and reflected sky. If she glanced at all, it was only to count exits or note the one surveillance camera with a fogged dome. Inside intake, air smelled like bleach and the attempt to erase yesterday. A med tech waved a wand over her palms and frowned at the readout. The backpack went through the X-ray tunnel and stumped the machine. The techs opened it with a practiced care reserved for the bags of strangers, dry clothes, a vacuum-sealed roll of gauze, 3 packets of oral rehydration salts, a little tin with a torn label that smelled faintly of eucalyptus balm. At the bottom, a folded triangle of canvas revealed a compact tool roll that would have felt at home in any motor pool, a micro torque wrench, a stubby soldering iron, crimpers, a coil of paracord, a whetstone with its own stitched pocket. The supervisor tapped the whetstone. "That's not standard," she said, trying to make conversation with someone who wasn't interested in making conversation back. The woman unrolled the toolkit further and touched the whetstone once, like a ritual. Then she closed the roll and cinched its strap as neatly as a field dressing. "Vitals are fine," the med tech said, surprised by the numbers. "You sure she hasn't eaten today?" The woman lifted a shoulder as if to acknowledge the question and the impossibility of properly answering it without speaking. The supervisor scribbled a note and slid a form across the table. "If you don't want to talk, you'll still need to sign." The woman looked at the line for the signature, at the printed name it implied. For a second, the world narrowed to the breadth of that space. She wrote with tidy, unshowy penmanship. The letters didn't tremble. "Lyra Halle," on the parade square. The black dog sneezed the dust of his sleep dreams and lifted its head. The Bracken Ridge compound sprawled across 200 acres of what once had been a logistics depot and briefly a racetrack. Now it served as a training ground and disaster response hub with ambitions of being both the best and the last resort. It wore its seriousness openly wind turbines like skeletal sentries, an antenna farm that listened to storms and people. With equal attention, and a cafeteria that could feed 1,000 in an hour if fear was the appetizer. She sat on the end of a bench in the intake bay and watched the clock without appearing to watch it. A trainee with freckles under his eyes fumbled a tourniquet. She stood, moved closer, and without touching him she drew his attention to the twist rod and the tiny numbers etched near the cleat. He corrected his grip. The band tightened. She nodded once and returned to the bench. "Thanks," he said, the word landing near her boots and skittering under the bench like a nervous beetle. She tied her hair back with a band from her wrist and retied her bootlace with the kind of attention some people reserved for vows. She rolled her shoulders and the jacket reshaped to reveal a harness, stitched into the inside panel as if the coat had once been a piece of equipment. The supervisor returned with a folder and a look like a messenger told to carry news she didn't. "Make, your record is complicated," she said carefully. "There's an alert attached to your name. I've got calls out. In the meantime, we can't let you roam the compound unescorted." The woman nodded. Roam implied wandering without purpose. She had never roamed. She moved from one need to the next as if someone had braided a rope through time and she was following it hand over hand. "Where were you headed?" the supervisor asked, habit stubborn as rain. The woman shifted her gaze toward the maintenance bays and the tower beyond. She lifted 2 fingers slightly, then pinched them close. A habit from a different life. 2 minutes, then wait. The supervisor tried not to sigh. "We can spare 1 runner," she said into the radio. "Take her to Bay 3, let's keep eyes on." The runner assigned to her was 22, maybe 23, and made the mistake of filling silence with words. He was friendly in the eager way of good dogs and new soldiers. "I'm Cole," he said. "They put me on night drone crews because I don't blink much. I mean, I do blink. I just thought, you know." She looked at him, not unkindly. His boots were new. His laces weren't. He wore his radio too high on his shoulder. Someone had taught him to keep it there like a badge. "Bad storm band moving in," he said, pointing. "Weather says 6 inches in 4 hours. Levee watch is high alert. They'll run evacuation drills until the rain makes it real." She lifted her chin to the towers. The red light blinked a little faster now. She listened to the wind with an Ear-turned by too many nights under tarps where envelopes of dry air were more valuable than whiskey. Bay 3 smelled like oil and forgiveness. Engines sat open-mouthed on stands. A stack of Mal vests slumped like tired men. A whiteboard listed call signs and marker that had bled when someone wiped off yesterday. The chief of the bay, a man called Mendez, glanced up and frowned at Cole like a faucet that wouldn't stop dripping. "You bring me a new problem?" he asked. Cole started to explain, then stopped when he saw the woman step past him, set her pack down, and walk to a bench where a rescue boat motor lay in stubborn pieces. Without asking, she studied the disassembled parts. The alignment marks chalked on the bench, the small neat pile of screws left over from the last attempt. "That's out of service," Mendez said. "Parts shortage." She glanced at the thrust housing, at the bronze burrs that said rough water, at the hairline crack in the impeller collar. She reached for the tool roll she'd brought, slid the whetstone out, and tested the edge of a screwdriver against it with a touch that was almost affectionate. Mendez's frown softened into something almost like gratitude. "Who taught you that?" She glanced not at him but at her hands, remembering another pair on top of them, heavier, careful, teaching without breaking. A father with eyes like a winter hill. A mother with a voice that stayed steady. When everyone else's cracked, she rubbed her thumb over the whetstone's smooth corner and set it down like a prayer. "Drop a if you've ever been underestimated." The radio clipped to Mendez's pocket crackled and spilled urgency into the bay. "Command to all. We've got a weather cell doing something the model doesn't like." Levy watch escalated to level 3. Repeat, level 3. Prep boats. Prep med caches. Prep comes redundancy. Drill may become live. The woman moved before anyone told her to. She reached for the pile of vests, sorting by size with the kind of feel that comes from having watched too many seconds matter. She checked each vest's yo cartridge by weight instead of faith, swapped one that felt lazy, and rethreaded a strap whose stitching had been flirtatious with failing. Cole saw and copied. "We've got checklists," he said. She tapped the laminated sheet on the wall and nodded, then used the list like a rhythm pattern rather than scripture. She didn't skip steps, but she didn't worship them either. When Mendez tossed her a gimbal-stabilized camera, she caught it and checked the firmware number without looking at the cheat sheet. "You know the new interface?" Mendez asked, curiosity winning against rulebook caution. She plugged the camera into a tablet, skimmed the setup menus, and disabled the default overlay that misreported battery life by 20% when cold. She lifted the drone case lid, tightened the propellers that loved to vibrate loose in rain, and peeled back foam to reveal 2 batteries someone had put away discharged dead weight. If they left the bay uncorrected. She nodded toward the charging rack. Cole hustled. "Who is she?" Whispered someone near the door. "Intake says she doesn't talk," someone else replied. "Plenty do," Mendez muttered dryly. And the bay chuckled and got faster. Outside, the rain's tempo changed. It started writing in longer strokes. The storm map on the wall spit out new lines, new warnings. A siren near the tower sighed awake and then swallowed its breath. Waiting, the woman pulled a med kit that had too much dust on it and unlatched its buckles. She inventoried by touch nasal airways, an IV start kit, QuickLot that hummed faintly in its wrapper like static, a trauma shear with a nick that would catch on fabric if you were scared and hurried. She sharpened the shear on the whetstone until it whispered through a strip of canvas, and then rewrapped the kit in a way that would open obediently in rain. When a trainee from the next bay oversliced his palm on an aluminum strut and swore, she stood with the kit already open. He blinked and held his hand over the floor like he wasn't sure whether to bleed on the concrete or learn something. She took his wrist gently, turned his hand palm up and assessed. The cut was clean. The edges smiled at each other as if about to kiss. She irrigated with clean water warmed in her own hands, not the cold tap. because the body listens for kindness. She placed a butterfly closure with the precision of a seamstress and wrapped the hand without strangling fingers. The trainee watched her do it with respect that had nothing to do with rank. "You a medic?" he whispered. She paused, memory shadowing her mouth. Her mother's hands had done these things in tents and kitchens and back seats, had taught them without delay or drama. Her father's voice had added quietly, "When you have to choose between speed and precision, choose precision until speed grows from it." She shook her head no, then nodded yes with the smallest tilt, and that was all the truth she'd let out. Into the room. Comment ready if you'd trust her in a crisis. The runner's radio crackled again. Perimeter reports a convoy approaching Gate 2. Unscheduled. No transponder ping. Repeat. Unscheduled convoy approaching Gate 2. Mendez swore, a word that tasted like old coffee and new problems. "Cole, with me." "You." He pointed at the woman and caught himself. He didn't know what to call her. "Stay put." She stayed, for the length of 3 heartbeats. Then she looked at the bay's security monitor. Gate 2 resolve sharpened into trucks that had too much mud and too little government on their sides. The lead vehicle's hood was strapped closed with ratchet cords. Its license plate retired from honesty years ago. The men in the back wore the kind of posture that made rifles look like decisions instead of tools. She looked at the weather map. She looked at the time stamped at the top. She looked at the blown-out corner of the drone case where a novice had dropped it last week. She looked at the clipboard with the roster of who was supposed to be where and noted 3 names that had not yet checked in from River Watch. She lifted the drone case and the camera, slung a vest over her shoulder, and walked not toward the convoy but toward the tower. The tower's lobby was a glass throat swallowing nervous light. A young systems tech with a buzz cut and too much gum handed was arguing with a server that refused to behave like a server should. "It's not the network," he said to another tech, as if saying so enough could make it true. "It's the permissions." Somebody moved a folder that shouldn't move. The woman set the drone case down and gestured toward the console. The buzzcut tech blinked. "You can't be back here," he said. "Automatically." She pointed at the bobbing green dot on the levee status map. It pulsed like a heartbeat trying to be brave. The tech swallowed. "Okay, but," she held out her hand, patient. He hesitated, then slid the keyboard toward her and watched like someone opening a safe and hoping not to anger the owner. Her fingers moved with a quiet that belonged in libraries and surgical theaters. She didn't hunt for keys. She asked the system questions the way you ask a skittish animal to trust you softly, with authority disguised as kindness. She moved files back to where they belonged without dragging them through the visible desktop, then killed a service chewing bandwidth like a bored dog. When the logs populated, she found the sour line of an intrusion attempt that had dressed up as a backup routine and stripped it of its costume. Buzzcut whistled, which the room did not have time for. "How did you?" She tilted her head at the red light that had finally decided to own its panic. Then she tapped the drone feed and kicked video to the big screen. The approaching convoy resolved into the kind of detail that made stomachs decide to be empty. The rear truck's tarp lifted in the wind to reveal crates stamped with a logo that wasn't supposed to be in this country. "Security tower," Buzzcut said, voice suddenly a size bigger than his throat. "We have eyes on. Do not engage." Until the radio blew snow. Underneath it, a voice tried to be calm. "They're not stopping." On the parade square, the black dog stood and barked once, the sound small against distance and rain. Men on the roof sighted rifles and waited for orders. The rain would blur. The woman stepped sideways to the fire panel. She pulled the lever that cut power to the public address system before anyone could say panic publicly. She tapped the backup generator test and watched the green bars salute. Then she used a line of code to open a maintenance channel that the Newest update had hidden under an icon shaped like a wrench. On that channel, she spoke for the first time. Not out loud. She typed, "Move pallets to interior. Doors lock after 10. Rooftop. Hold fire until confirmation." Green. Buzzcut stared at the words on his screen as if they had crawled out from under a door. "Who are you?" he whispered. She didn't answer with her hands or her mouth. She gestured for his radio and typed on it too, the muscle memory rude and intimate. She set a soft lockdown that would let people flee but make trucks argue with gates. Gate 2 did not let the convoy pass without conversation. The lead truck's driver leaned out the window and tried to make his grin contagious. Security answered with a raised hand and a palm that meant universal stop. The rear truck fidgeted, brakes hissing like irritated snakes. "Get Archer," Buzzcut said into the tower's intercom. Now, Major Lou Archer arrived with the weather. He carried it in his shoulders like regret. He had the look of a man who counted his people when he woke and again before he slept. And still the number on the wall argued with his memory. He didn't see her at first. His gaze went to the convoy, to the levee map, to the radio. He barked. 3 orders and a question, and got back 2 confirmations and a hiss of uncertainty. That sounded like the river dot. Then he saw her, not as a ghost. As a person in an old jacket with a little rain on the collar and eyes that accounted for exits. First, his face changed the way a cloud bank does when the wind takes a breath between gusts. "Halle," he said, as if tasting a word he'd sworn off. "That can't." She looked at him and didn't look away. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She let him move through disbelief without offering him shortcuts. He pointed at the screen where the convoy idled like a warning undone by grammar. "We don't want a fight," he said. "Not with the river about to argue. If they breach, they'll pull bodies from where we need hands." She nodded once and lifted the drone case. Archer stepped aside without letting himself think about why he trusted a ghost. She moved to the open bay at the tower's shoulder and launched the drone into rain that made cameras regret being cameras. The gimbal fought, then steadied. She skimmed along the fence line and zoomed in on a detail that men in trucks didn't think anyone would notice. She set the drone carefully on the folding table where it became a citizen and not a spy. With her other hand, she reached into the ledger and cut the elastic that bound a low stack of cards. IDs, some genuine. Some so good you'd hate them. "Who's funding you?" Mendez asked from the loft of a shelf. The ledger man smiled a smile that no one had asked for. "People who are tired of being told where their water may go." She turned a page. "Names, phone numbers. A hand-drawn map of the West Side with the neighborhoods shaded like an insurance form." She suppressed an old response to old handwriting that used to share her table. She looked at the radio man and tapped the handset. He didn't move. She gestured for him to slide it toward her. He did. She smiled with one corner of her mouth. That could be read as thanks by men who didn't deserve it. She keyed the transmit twice and listened. A reply clicked, then a pause. 2 words arrived, soft and wrong. "Glass ghost." Cole's shoulders stiffened like a wire tug. Mendez didn't blink. She kept her face still. She keyed again, returned a word. No doubt the 2 men went quiet, like the room had been told a joke it didn't understand. She pocketed the radio and the ledger and nodded for the men to lace their fingers. They did, too casual, like it was a drill. Outside, rain changed. The sound of it shifted, made finer by distance. An engine in the trees. Not loud enough to be a truck, not soft enough to be a motorcycle. She pushed the men out the door and into the mud, face down, not roughly. Cole held guard with seriousness that had learned to sit up straight today. Mendez watched the tree line and decided not to say the curse he was thinking. The engine rounded the broken fence corner. A small quad came into view, driven by a woman with a braid and a face that had spent winter outdoors. The woman's eyes Flicked over the tableau and read it in 2 seconds. Wrong uniforms. Wrong people, wrong day to test the river. That she didn't floor the quad. She braked and lifted both hands. I work the ranch next door, she said, practical as a shovel. They told me to bring fuel because the generator's fussy. She glanced at the uniforms and the stack of crates and the way the men's boots matched each other. She made a small private nod that said, I see what I see. The quad's cargo rack held fuel jugs and a toolbox, with a dent someone had taken personally. She stepped to the quad and popped the toolbox lid. Inside sat wrenches, honest and old, and beneath them a phone whose back cover had been lost and replaced with a guitar pick. She slid the phone out and reversed it. The lock screen had the same green symbol that had loved their monitors. The woman with the braid didn't flinch. Someone in town pays cash, she said. Says they're fixing what the county won't. I didn't ask questions, because the roof has a hole and the corn don't care. Mendez relaxed half an inch. Cole didn't. He learned to trust later than he learned to tie knots. She pointed toward the compound silhouette through rain. You should go there, she said. Tell them the truth the way you told it now. The woman nodded. My aunt says honesty is cheaper than lies if you live long enough. She fixed the fuel jugs with a strap so they wouldn't bounce out, then tapped the quad's fender. Go. The woman went. They zip-tied the 2 men and tucked them under the syphilis under the woman. They zip-tied the 2 men and tucked-tied the 2 men and tucked them under the Eve out of the worst of the rain because decency is not a transaction. She walked the building once, hands behind her back like a school inspector, and found a second room behind the first with a cooler full of ice packs and a small sealed case lined with foam that was too clean to be innocent. She opened the case. Inside lay 3 more daughter boards like the one she had crushed. Their solder joints were tidy and their serial numbers were missing. She wrapped them in a rag and put them in her pack as if they were knives. Mendez looked at the crates stacked by the back door. You want to know what's in the rest? She shook her head. Later, she mouthed. A word that held the weight of a life she mentioned only in handwriting. They took the ledger and the radio and left. The building's lights on so the rain would have something friendly to look at. The road home was shorter. That's the trick of roads after decisions. Back at the compound, the black dog greeted them with a shake that threw rain like confetti. Cole scratched him with the hand that wasn't on his rifle and finally smiled like a boy in operations. Archer stood with his back to the memorial wall, as if this angle could change its list. He reached for the ledger without reaching too far into her space. She gave it to him like a man gives water to a friend, easy, no ceremony. He paged with the restraint of someone who rarely indulges in hate. He stopped on a name, not a person. A shell company that smelled like a tree with a fungus on it. Green Strata, he read. Never heard of them. Buzzcott had. He snapped his fingers at the air. LLC out of state. Showed up at a conference 2 months ago with promises about flood resilience. Wanted access to our training calendar to coordinate. I sent them the brochure and a picture of the cafeteria. They didn't laugh. She pointed at the daughter boards in her hand. Buzzcott whistled under his breath. They laughed here. The legacy trunk popped a quiet tone. She answered it without looking at Archer. The dam operator returned to the line like a neighbor leaning over a fence. You got your quarter foot, he said. You want a hair more, or you want a nap? She keyed a word. Hold. He laughed. Bless the old codes. She hung the handset and finally addressed Archer. They'll try again in daylight, she said. They'll use a phone call instead of a fake delivery. They'll ask for a tour. They'll want to see the new software. Archer glanced at the server rack's soot mark where the couplers had misbehaved. We'll give them a tour, he said, of a box with no wires in it. She allowed herself half a smile that didn't reach the scar. Droppa, if you're still with us. The night began to thin at the edge. A lighter gray scribbled under the clouds. The cafeteria emptied of kids and filled with the workers who made the world move at 7. She washed her hands in a sink that groaned and wiped them dry on the clean section of a towel somebody had folded badly. In Bay 3, she rewrapped a handle on a rescue hook where the tape had bubbled. She tightened a buckle that had always been lazy. She retied a knot some fool had made pretty instead of strong. She stacked batteries in a way that someone would thank her for later without knowing why. Cole appeared with 2 coffees, one of them a crime against coffee. She took it with a nod anyway. He shifted on his feet, then said it. "You were gone," he said. "But you weren't." She considered the hallway, the river, the ladled soup of the day. She sipped and let heat burn the chill in the small bones of her hand. "I was learning to keep quiet," she said. "Why come back now?" he asked, as if the answer could help him choose the rest of his life. She looked at the ledger on the table under Archer's palm. "Because someone used my name." "As if it was furniture," she said. "And because the rain doesn't care how long a lie has been told." Archer joined them, set down his cup, and folded himself into the space of 2 people and a third problem. "I should take you off the board," he said. "I should call a roomful of men who like having their names in minutes and let them decide what to do with a woman they declared dead." She faced him, calm as a yard after a storm. "If you take me off the board, you still have the game," she said. "They will keep playing." He watched her face for a lie he hoped to find. He didn't, he exhaled. "Stay on the board," he said. "At least until the river finds its manners." They stood like that for 6 seconds that rearranged a history neither of them had asked for. Buzzcut waved from the tower window. "Sunrise in 5, he shouted. "Too full of statistics and not enough of poetry to say it nicer." Archer tapped the ledger. "We bring county in at 8, he said. "We brief them with enough truth to keep them useful." She nodded. She pulled the whetstone and ran it once down the edge of the trauma shears. The sound was small and kind. By 7:30, the rain had broken into pieces that could be walked through like beads. People who owned boots but not excuses showed up. The mess hall served pancakes that tasted like a childhood you want to keep. The memorial wall didn't change its list. The black dog made the rounds and accepted offerings like a god with a sense of humor. Archer stood at the front of the operations room, a clipboard he didn't need tucked under his arm because habit is a better holster than nostalgia. County officials arrived with umbrellas and concern. The Green Strata man arrived with a blazer and the kind of smile that assumes gravity is negotiable. He introduced himself as Richard Gray. The name tried to be a color he could hide in. It failed under fluorescent lights. He shook hands like a man who had practiced with a mirror. He offered a brochure heavy with stock photography and promises. His eyes landed on Lyra and slid off as if she were a reflection in a window. Archer didn't introduce her. He didn't label the room. He clicked the remote and brought up a map of the county with the levee IV drips annotated in the margins. He spoke cleanly in sentences the county could follow. Gray nodded at appropriate moments and then threaded a sentence about public-private partnership through the room like a rope. "We can help modernize your control systems," he said. "You're doing remarkable work with outdated tools." Buzzcut coughed and looked at the legacy trunk, like an old friend getting insulted at a dinner party. Mendez didn't bother to hide his contempt. Outdated tools hold when shiny ones melt. He sighed. She did the same to the second and third stakes. She let the charges stay buried. Moving them now would damage what nature had decided to forgive if left politely alone. She tied a line loosely around the cluster so an overeager shovel later would find rope before trouble. "Who did this?" the crew chief asked, angry like a man who'd discovered teeth under his bed. She touched the plastic wrap, the grit, the lazy way the camo had been applied. Not her brand, not military. Hired hands. Back in operations, Gray had made himself at home in a chair that didn't belong to him. He smiled when she walked in, but the smile had sweat on it. "We're all on the same side," he said. The 3 coin cells on the table in a row. "Which side is that?" she asked. Gray examined the coin cells as if they were poker chips. He composed his face into innocence. "The side that doesn't want people to drown." "Then stop helping." "The river aim," she said. He tried a chuckle. It broke in the middle. Archer stood between Gray and the legacy trunk. "We'll continue to evaluate vendors," he said with the smoothness of a door that will shut politely after the guest leaves. Gray rose, gathered his packet, and nodded at each man who could be a future Grant. He did not nod at her. "We'll be in touch," he said. As he left, the black dog followed for 3 steps, then decided fleas were not worth it and returned to Mendez's boot. Buzzcut waited until Gray's car turned onto the road before whispering, "We could tag him." She tapped the radio she'd taken from the barn. "We did." Archer's mouth twitched. "Of course we did." They tracked Gray's vehicle on the legacy trunks, not GP sangulation. Old school, the kind of skill that will never trend, but always matter. He headed not to a hotel, not to a county office, but to the same timber-cut road. He knew when to smile and when to hide. "Let him run," Archer said. "We'll watch." She nodded. She sat for the first time in hours and felt the room keep moving around her like a river in a channel she had dug herself. Cole brought her a sandwich. She ate half and put half in a napkin for later, because later is always hungry. Archer approached and stood where she would not have to lift her eyes. Far to hear him. "I need the rest of the story," he said, quiet. "If I'm going to keep you on the board, I need to know what the last 7 years changed." She weighed the chair beneath her against the memory of a tent that had been made of light and quiet orders. She spoke without ornament. They called. "The op a clean sweep," she said. "In a valley that has never been clean, we went in not to shoot but to listen. Someone else went in to steal. They used our call signs to move through doors and used our faces to make cameras bored. They completed their theft and turned the river on us to erase the footprint. I swam out. I didn't report in. If I had, they would have used me again. I followed the symbol instead." "Alone?" Archer asked. "Alone is faster," she said, "and lonelier. Both helped." "What did you find?" he asked. "A sequence," she said. "Ports, dams, flood zones. Not disaster profiteers. Movers. They want routes that police can't claim in a press conference. Rivers make good roads when no one expects them. And now? Now they're tired of waiting for weather," she said. "They're making their own." He absorbed that like a man swallowing a coin. Buzzcut called out from the console. Gray's car stopped at the timber road. "He's talking to a man whose face looks like a contract." Archer flicked his chin at the screen. The camera couldn't kiss the distance, but the posture was enough. Gray deferential. The other man patient like a banker counting things that breathe. She stood. Mendez stood. Cole was already up. Archer raised a palm and then dropped it. "Go." They moved as the rooms. Air pressure changed. They took the quad the ranchwoman had left. The battery swapped for one she had in her pocket, because foresight is courtesy. They moved through trees with politeness for branches and contempt for ruts. At the bend where the road pretended to be shy, they dismounted. They went the rest of the way with feet and patience. Mendez smelled smoke not from cigarettes, but from a generator that had been asked to perform past pride. Cole pointed at boot scuffs on a rock. She nodded and let him feel smart for seeing what he saw. They reached a clearing where the timber had gone bald. A tent sat with the smugness of new nylon. A table under it held radio guts spilled like a patient mid-surgery. Gray stood with his hands in pockets talking to a man with a baseball cap and the attitude of a spreadsheet. She didn't step into the clearing. She remained part of a tree. She listened. The spreadsheet man spoke in numbers. "Routes in 12 hours if the west side goes under. We can move 40 across before anyone stops filming water." After that, too much spotlight. Gray murmured agreements. The man tapped the ledger hers. She recognized the crease where she'd folded a corner once with a thumbnail. Your boys. At the base got soft, the man said. Nobody thought to look under the south wing. We had to poke them. Poking is bad for the brand. Gray shrugged as if it were a sweater he couldn't remove. They'll modernize. We'll help. The man smiled in a way that had no warmth. You'll help us move 40 across, he said. Mendez's finger tightened on his trigger. She put 2 fingers on his wrist and eased it. Not yet. She slipped the small drone from her pocket and slid it into the clearing's edge. It crawled under the table and looked up at the underbellies of crime and confidence. It saw a sat phone blinking. A green heartbeat. It saw a symbol etched with a knife into the table's edge. G. She pulled the drone back and whispered 3 words into her mic. Archer answered with 1. Copy. She waited for the movement of wind. She used it to cover her advance. She stepped into the clearing like a question mark that had learned judo. Gray startled. The spreadsheet man did not. He looked at her face and did math. He did not arrive at the right sum. He said, "You're not on the wall anymore." She didn't gift him an answer. She held up the radio she had borrowed from his barn men and tossed it onto the table where it skidded to a stop against the sat phone. The man's eyebrows lifted. You're good. Better than you, Mendez said from behind a tree without showing himself. Coal somewhere behind a log clicked, his safety off and back on like punctuation. The man didn't go for a weapon. He went for a sentence. You can't stop water. Sometimes. She said, you can teach it to prefer a different path. He smiled again, same absence of sunlight. You sound like your mother. She did not move. In her chest, something old and small uncoiled. He gestured at the sat phone. Call your boss, he said. Tell him you have a ghost who refuses to be polite. She didn't touch the phone. She touched the table's edge. The G cut into it, scraped her nail. Cole's voice arrived too loud in her ear. Too moving. Left, he said. Rifles. Mendez's voice stayed silk. I see them. The clearing held its breath. The rain held its breath. The river, somewhere insisting on being itself, kept moving. She made a decision not to belong to the clearing anymore. She knocked the sat phone off the table with the back of her hand. It hit the dirt and looked offended. She closed the ledger with a flat palm and slid it into her jacket like a day saved for later. The man in the cap finally reached for his weapon. She didn't aim for him. She aimed for the radio on the table, for the antenna that would scream for help. The bullet clipped it clean. The radio died without a funeral. Men moved at the edge of her vision. Mendez's shots were punctuation marks in a language she had never wanted to learn but had learned anyway. Cole's breath was a saw. His shots were careful. She grabbed the sat phone and dropped it into a pocket of mud, where its battery would think again before offering service. She pivoted, checked the left, the right, and then the space where men forget to look, the angle at the ground. Gray tried to run. He ran into a rope Mendez had placed when no one was watching. He hit dirt without dignity. The man in the cap crouched behind the tent pole and recalculated his opinions about everything. She held him in the rifle's geometry. She didn't shoot. He didn't either. The day held. Sirens did not arrive. The river did. Not here, but in the bones of men in the clearing. It moved the way consequence moves when it remembers you. She gestured for the man to stand. He did. He kept his hands in the kind of compliance expensive lawyers teach. Name? She asked. He smiled like a warranty. Which one do you want? Yours, she said. He said a name that felt wrong in his mouth. She filed it, but wrote a question. Mark around it in her head. They bound Gray and the man with zip ties because for now, justice is plastic. They walked them down the cut road and back to the compound with the kind of silence that counts steps until lunch. When they reached the gate, The black dog wagged at Cole and ignored the two men with the egalitarian dignity of a Saint in operations. Archer waited with two county deputies who wore the badge like a shirt they didn't take off at night. He took one look at the man in the cap and said nothing good. "Who taught you that path?" he asked quietly. She lifted her gaze to the ceiling as if it could contain an answer. In her chest, old instruction unspooled, her father's voice low over a rifle that could place a whisper in a window at 1,000 yards. Her mother's hands pressing, compresses into a wound while inventorying the room for laughter or light, or anything that could barter with pain. She gestured at the map and rotated a panel view with minimum flourish. Archer took the hint and radioed levee crews with new steps and a new rhythm. It almost worked. Then the convoy at Gate 2 decided it didn't want to be a convoy anymore. The lead truck revved. The plow lowered, and the fence questioned its commitment. To being a fence, security deployed smoke. The wind misbehaved. The world became a lesson in gray. "Roof team hold." Archer barked, and his voice held them the way a forearm bars a door. In the wind, in the gray, in the problem that could multiply into loss. The woman made a decision that meant showing everyone a piece of herself. She had packed into a quiet place and told to stay still. She slid the whetstone back into her pocket because some rituals matter when others fall apart. She reached for the bay locker with the Sharps inventory and found the case no one but Mendez really touched. She opened it and lifted out a rifle that had been cleaned on days. People wanted to remember being good at things. Mendez saw her and opened his mouth to say the policy. Then he closed it and opened the door to the roof. On the roof, the rain was a hand on the back of the neck. She lay behind the low parapet and set the rifle's bipod without letting metal complain. She looked through the scope and discovered a world that had always been waiting, thin and precise and honest as a ruler. Her breathing did not announce itself. It arrived like a person who belonged in the room. She did not aim at the driver. She did not aim at anyone's center of a life that could yet be used for better things. She aimed at the pin holding the plow's left hinge. She had done harder. Shots in places that had never made maps. She let rain and distance and time become a small problem, solved by a smaller movement. She touched the trigger the way a doctor touches a shoulder before a stitch. The rifle coughed. The plow's hinge whispered apart. The plow shuddered and then turned it stubborn into useless. The truck nosedived, tire whining, and kissed the gate with no enthusiasm. On the tower, Archer exhaled a wordless thank you. On the ground, security moved in a way that meant trained instead of frightened. The rear truck reconsidered its enthusiasm and threw itself into reverse in a panic that made mud applaud. "Drop a if that shot surprised you." The woman adjusted and chambered without drama. She aimed again, this time at the trailer hitch of the rear truck, where a fat pin thought itself safe. The bullet clipped it, metal spat an objection, and the trailer became a sulking child forced to let go. The road swallowed it. The truck shuddered, spun its tires, found no traction, and gave up the idea of leaving the conversation. Security closed. The radio sang overlapping commands, anxious and competent. Archer moved pieces on the board. Buzzcott saved logs with a new respect for the distance between right now and wrong later. In the shelter of the parapet. The woman's phone, which no one had seen and would not have tolerated, vibrated once, soft as a memory. She ignored it. She broke the rifle down more efficiently than organization charts usually allow. She wiped rain from its bolt with the corner of her jacket that had waited for this job. Mendez took it without touching her fingers and hid it where policy and gratitude wouldn't have to argue. Inside the tower, fresh alarms learned to sing. The levee sequence she had cued began to work, but a patch of physics decided to have its own adventure. Pressure on the north culvert, then a plate in a way that numbers had predicted, but still hurt to watch. "We've got to ease it more," Buzzcott said, not to her but to the room that contained her. She found the manual interplay. that let a human say yes where a system said maybe later. She shifted a gate 3 degrees and pulled up the street map overlaid with the bus route the training cohort used in drills. 3 names still had not checked in. The bus's GPS dot was small, judgy, stuck at a bend where water loved to pretend it was a road. "Get me that bus," Archer said. "Now." The radio heartbeats later produced a driver whose voice was trying to be State Park calm in a falling tree. "We're boxed," he said. "Water on both sides. Engine like doing theater. Kid's decent, one of them," he paused. "One of them says she can swim it." I said no. The woman didn't wait for permission. She was already out the door, Cole hurrying to keep up. "Boat?" he asked, breath bright with adrenaline. She shook her head, calculating current and angle in time. The boat would be too slow to stage. She veered toward Bay 3, toward the rack where line reels waited, toward the shelf where harnesses hung in tidy stillness. She coiled a line over her shoulder and tossed. A second to Cole. He dropped it and had to pick up both his courage and a rope. She didn't smile at him, but she did lower the coil to a weight that wouldn't embarrass him. "Archer says do not," a voice tried to say through a corridor speaker, and she was past it. Feet making decisions Marble couldn't argue with. Outside, wind took aim at faces without asking names. She cut across the square, past the black dog now pacing like it had a job to do, past the memorial wall, which she still didn't allow her eyes to find. She moved through the side gate into rain that had more words than patience and jogged toward the road that curved to the buses. Cole followed, not graceful but not quitting, which is what the world asks some days. They reached the bend and saw the bus tilted like a tired animal, water licking its tires, windows pressed with faces that didn't yet know whether to be afraid or brave. She planted her heels against a fence post that had remembered how to be solid and tied a bowline with a speed that would have impressed a sailor. She checked Cole's knot without insulting it and clipped the line through a pulley to ease the angle. "Hey!" The driver shouted through the door glass, breath-making fog flowers. "You're not supposed to be out here." She pointed at the water level inches from the exhaust, and then at a point downstream where debris piled like a future. She raised 2 fingers, 2 minutes, then pointed at the roof hatch. The driver looked. His face did the math. He started to move passengers, one by one, to the center aisle. The kids watched with the heavy attention of new soldiers. She leaned back into the rope, used her weight with calculation rather than force, and eased the bus's nose toward the slope that wanted it. Cole followed her lead a second after, learning. In the instant the way some lessons arrive as storms, not lectures, the bus shifted. The water complained, the rope sang. On the second pull, the front tire kissed a patch of gravel it liked, and the bus adopted a better opinion of effort. On the third, a log found the rear bumper with the kind of intimacy that makes grown men swear in front of children. She adjusted the angle of pull by 8 degrees and a prayer, and Cole copied without needing the numbers. "Hold." She shouted before remembering she hadn't planned to use her voice. The word surprised Cole. It surprised her more. But the river didn't care either way. It held because physics allowed it, and because the driver braked when told. Trusting a stranger in a jacket older than his trainees, they worked in swells and rests. The rope a metronome, rain a choir, muscles a conversation. The bus found the slope, climbed it grudgingly, and then, like some things do when given a reason, decided to help. It cleared the water's sulk. It found the shoulder. The driver opened the door and cried without tears, which is another way of saying thank you when you're busy. She checked the kids with field eyes color, breathing, the particular set of a jaw when someone is trying not to cry. One girl had an ankle that argued. She wrapped it and gave the girl a chocolate bar from her pocket, because kindness is fuel that burns warm. "Who are you?" The driver asked, softer now that his voice didn't have to hold a bus. She shook her head. It wasn't a refusal. It was a promise to answer later if later made room. They returned to the compound with a line of wet footprints announcing that rescue is a kind of parade. The black dog met them and approved of everyone by wagging at exactly the right height. For each person, Archer stood under the overhang and watched them arrive. He looked older in the rain and younger in relief. "Good work," he said, and meant it for both of them, though his eyes returned to her like a compass that knew north against its will. Inside, the tower was tired of secrets. The network intrusion had sprouted another head. Buzzcut cut it, and two more grew. Someone somewhere was very interested in the levee controls. Someone somewhere had a reason to make the west side flood. Why would they do that? Cole asked, naive in a way the world should have let him keep. Because chaos has its customers. Archer said, staring at the convoy now contained, the men zip-tied and unhappy. The cargo revealed to be a mix of medical supplies and something. In a crate that had been built to fit an object that wanted to be famous. The woman drew closer to the crate and read the stamped codes without letting her face confess recognition. She glanced at the manifest Buzzcut printed and flipped to a page that had been obviously added later. The font betrayed it. The staple didn't match the other staples. Some lies are tactile. It didn't blink. It waited, amber steady, the color of a promise that could sour. She stopped one step shy of the case and let her weight settle evenly. Rain ticking off the brim of the overhang like a clock they didn't own. Archer lifted a hand. Security froze without rattling. The woman at the gate had a courier's stillness, everything contained, nothing wasted. Up close, Lyra could read the fatigue under the eyes, the windburn that doesn't belong to office work, the careful way the jaw held a thought like a coin you might have to spend. "You're Lyra Hale," the woman said, voice low, throat raw. "From Weather, you don't know me." Lyra didn't nod. She watched the case. Its handle light pulsed once, a polite nudge. "Hands," Archer said mildly, "because mild is what keeps men from making the day worse." The woman lifted her palms again. "They told me to bring this to the gate and say a phrase. They said if I did, they'd stop the water. They said if I didn't, they knew where my sister sleeps." A little silence fell, the kind that makes men check their holsters for a different kind of courage. Cole took a half step closer, then stopped because Lyra hadn't. "What phrase?" Archer asked. The woman licked rain off her lip and said, "Tell Glass Ghost to come alone." The light in the handle brightened, then returned to amber. Somewhere in the server room, Process listened, hoping. Lyra crouched, slow as law. The case was high-grade polymer with a metal lattice under the skin, latches recessed, hinges proud enough to be arrogant. She didn't touch it. She breathed on the seam. Fog traced the line. No outgassing. No cheap glue. Whoever packed it wanted it to last longer than today. She reached into her pocket, pulled the tiny flathead, and slid it under a latch with a gentleness that would have forgiven a mistake if one wanted forgiving. She did not open the latch. She rode its edge to feel for tension. Somewhere inside, a bar moved a millimeter and stopped. Spring tension, not explosive. A tamper sensor, the sulking kind. Faraday? Mendez asked from her right shoulder, an offer wrapped in a question. Lyra stood and pointed at the vault in the lobby through the glass. Archer nodded. "Open it." He didn't have to tell her to move now. She already was. They walked the case into the lobby like pallbearers who didn't agree about the deceased. Inside, the vault blinked in its new, less haunted green. Lyra set the case on the threshold where steel was thickest and signaled for the door. "Wait," the courier blurted, fear stripping varnish. "They said once it opens the first time it starts burning itself down. Then we don't let it." "Open the first time," Lyra said, and slid the comms key fob, the scratched twin, into a maintenance jack hidden under the vault's frame lip. The vault hummed, then took a deep breath like a singer before a long note. Buzzcut appeared with The legacy trunk's patch cable like a priest with incense. Lyra nodded. He connected the trunk to the vault's chassis ground. Old tools. Older physics. Lyra knelt again and studied the handle light's cadence. Amber steady. Not countdown. Heartbeat. A waiting circuit looking for a particular greeting. She opened the notebook to a blank margin and wrote a rhythm with dots and dashes, how the light wanted to breathe. She matched it to an old handshake she had once insisted be able to run without Cloud. Without grace, without anyone's permission. She reached to the trunk, keyed a string that made no sense to anyone outside her skull, and watched the amber waver, then settle as if inside circuitry had heard the right song. She lifted the latch a hair, stopped, waited. No acceleration in the light's pulse. Good. She eased it farther until the latch sat open like a mouth that had finished the first syllable. Then she stopped, picked up the eucalyptus tin, smeared a whisper along the hinge pins, and waited another heartbeat so the oil could be older than Panic Dot the courier swallowed. If it's a bomb, it's not, Lyra said, not to be brave, but because the device's manners didn't match violence. It's a mouth. She opened the case. Inside, foam hugged a sealed inner box with a gasket and a recessed port. The foam had been cut by a careful hand, not a factory. Next to the box lay a keycard with a cracked corner and a sticker half peeled, an access badge for a facility whose name had been blacked out with a marker that bled. There was also a folded paper, old school to the point of insult. Lyra pinched it by a clean corner and unfolded with gloved hands. One line of handwriting. Talk on legacy, or they kill the town. Archer's jaw worked once. He lifted the legacy handset and didn't need to be told which channel. Lyra took the handset the way a diver takes air. She keyed, made no greeting, gave no name. A man's voice arrived, smooth, the kind of smooth that sands away culpability. Glass Ghost. Finally, we were beginning to think you'd forgotten your old toys. Lyra said nothing. She let the noise floor carry his ego back to him. Open the box, the voice suggested. Pleasant as hospitality. Lyra inspected the gasketed lid. The port next to it had a tiny letter stamped into metal. G. She set the handset down on the vault lip, held open by her shoulder. She pointed to Buzzcut and made a slicing motion. He cut power to the building's modern intercom. Legacy only. No echoes. This is the box you use when you want to erase the trail, Lyra said finally, voice steady as wet concrete. Not the one you use if you want to negotiate. The pause on the line was a smile losing a tooth. You always were fast. Not fast, she said. Precise. You're going to open it anyway, the voice said. Because you hate not knowing. Because you hate hurting more. And because you need me to, she said. Which means you can't afford to hurt the town. Not yet. Archer's eyes flicked to hers. She kept her face quiet. She unclipped the inner box, slid the gasket lid an inch, and stopped. Inside lay what looked like a stack of drives, the kind that sit in servers and remember things men later swear they never said. A small vial lay beside them, sealed with wax. Amber liquid inside like a captured sunset. Evidence, the voice said, as if offering dessert. Payments. The night you drowned. The day we dug you up for fun. Cole sucked a breath. In and stuffed it back down. You brought me your own rope, Lyra said. We brought you a choice, he countered. Plug the drives into your shiny tower, or the river learns to sing a new song. We trigger every charge the South Wing crew missed. We open every door you closed. We teach your county what negligence tastes like. Archer said nothing, because saying something would have been admitting he believed the man could do it. Lyra let 3 seconds happen. In those seconds she closed the inner box again, not cruelly. She reached under the foam and felt for what men who like control always forget spares. Under the foam's corner, a thin second gasket waited like a plan B. She took it, palmed it, slipped it into her jacket pocket. You built this to burn itself, she said. If we plug it in wrong, it erases. If we plug it in right, it talks. Only to you. Correct, the voice said, approval dressing up as friendliness. So plug it in right. Or we let gravity do its work, he said. Your culvert is full of kindness. It would love to learn a new habit. She looked at the vial, then at Archer. What's the liquid? Insurance, the voice said. A proof you can't ignore. Lyra lifted the vial with 2 fingers. The wax was old, real, the way archivists do things when they want to win arguments later. Inside floated a pinprick of something metallic. She held it to the vault light. In amber, a sliver of stamped steel winked. A fragment of a badge. A letter. Archer's face didn't move. His signature on that Kier memo had been thin black ink. Here, in the vial, was the edge of a badge they had shared the night. You left a piece of your friend behind, the voice said softly, faking empathy. We kept it safe. Lyra returned the vial to the foam without letting her hand learn to shake. She keyed the handset again, gave the line a quiet click. You want legacy, she said. You get legacy. She moved to the trunk, unplugged the ground to the vault, reattached to the inner box's lattice steel over polymer, a Faraday cradle that thought it could be a cradle forever. She clipped the trunk's audio coupler to the box's port. The light in the handle blinked amber green, testing etiquette. She keyed 2 tones. The box answered with 3. She matched the cadence and then stepped it apart a hair, widening the gap so that the handshake would wander. It did, obedient to the path she offered. Drop a, if you've ever had to outweight a bully. The box spoke. Not words, tones. The trunk translated into a printout because Buzzcut had insisted on keeping a dot matrix printer alive for reasons nobody loved him enough to fight. On paper, in jagged letters, appeared lines of ledger entries, dates, account numbers. Shell names that pretended to be charities and weren't. The smug signature from 7 years ago reappeared at the bottom of a page as if signatures could be copied across time like mold. Stop there. The voice instructed sharply. You don't have the right to print. We're in legacy, Lyra said, almost kind. It doesn't know what rights are. She unrolled fresh paper. Buzzcut fed it with the reverence he had for the old weird things that saved lives. On the screen above the trunk, nothing changed. They had cut modern display lines. On the paper, the world confessed in perforated edges. Archer watched the pages form, his hands steady because history needed a proof that wouldn't blink away. Enough, the voice said. We can still break your door. If you could. Lyra said you would have. Silence. Then a shift in the voice, from condescension to curiosity. You wrote this mess, didn't you? The failsafes. Peaches. They did work. They reset hinges. They replaced couplers with ones that would not melt for anyone's narrative. They walked the levee and wrote down every bolt that felt less than honest. Dr. Holly walked with them. She touched the culvert gate and smiled at the burr that had been polished away. You kept the edge clean, she said again, to the metal. Lyra tapped the trunk side lovingly. It called mine. The printer spit out a final page, then paused, breath caught. Lyra flipped the drive, extracted a small daughterboard writing piggyback, identical to the one she had already crushed. She placed it on the whetstone and lifted the flat head like a sacrament. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. She snapped the board in 2. The handset hissed like a snake losing its reason to. Pretend it was a river. Glass ghost, the voice said after a time. Not smooth now, interested. What do you want? Lyra looked at Archer. He held the paper like a man who could hand the world a spine. She looked at the courier, who looked like a woman who had carried fear like groceries and wanted to put it down. She looked finally past them at the memorial wall. Names, she said, in public. not as a rumor, as a fact. "You won't get all of them," he said. "Enough to make the rest run," she said. "Then what?" "Then we stop teaching." "Water tricks," she said without looking at the notebook where she had already written it. He chuckled. "You sound tired." "I'm efficient," she said. "You mistake mercy for fatigue." She hung the handset and began to do the simple work that makes big work possible. She sealed the vial in a pelican case. She cut the wax, took the fragment out, photographed it on graph paper, put it back, sealed it anew, labeled it in block. Letters with date, time, chain of custody start. She cleaned the hinges of the inner box. She wiped the trunk's connectors. She straightened the stack of paper so that when the county deputies arrived, their hands would know how to hold truth. Drop a if you've ever watched the right people finally get receipts. The deputies arrived with coffee and authority. That smelled like wet leather. Archer handed them the paper and a copy of the audio piping from the legacy trunk. He said nothing that could hurt later. He said enough to start. Gray wasn't back. He was already in county holding, practicing. The posture of a wealthy man surprised by Tuesday. The man in the cap's name, when it arrived on paper from a different source, would charm nobody and impress exactly one judge, who didn't need impressing to hold him without bail. The courier sat on a bench under the overhang with the black dog's head in her lap like a borrowed anchor. "Where's your sister?" Lyra asked again, this time as an invitation to be detailed. "Trailer park past the timber road," the courier said. "Lot 9. They said they'd move her if I asked questions." Archer nodded at Mendez. "Take 2, he said. "Quiet." Lyra stood. Archer raised an eyebrow that meant, "I can't tell you no, but I can pretend to try." She went anyway. Cole followed because he had learned the shape of his answers. Lot 9 had a roof, patched with license plates, and a porch where a chair sat, waiting for someone who remembered a lighter. The sister answered the door with sleep hair and a scar on her cheek that told a different story about last winter. She did not scream. She saw the courier behind Lyra and started breathing again. They brought her back, not because the base wanted new guests, but because there were minutes when being together mattered most. Back in operations, the legacy trunk had become a copy machine for sins. Buzzcut had fed the printer into an optical scanner that wasn't networked to anything with a pulse. Archer was on the radio with the dam operator, thanking him with a kind of politeness that makes men say yes next time. The inner box lay open. No longer a threat, now a library. The drives took their turns in the carriage. The dot matrix sang. Like a cricket choir dot, then the server room alarm remembered to be jealous. A new tone, not fire, not smoke. Lyra's head snapped toward it, like a compass hearing true north whisper. "Door," Buzzcut said, already moving. "Sensor sees a badge that doesn't exist." They hit the corridor at a run that didn't sound like panic because competent. Feet on tile don't brag. The server room door stood closed, its panel green. Lyra touched the handle with the back of her fingers. Warm, not hot. She keyed the maintenance override and cracked the door a finger's width. No smell of heat. No hiss of gas. She opened it the rest of the way. A figure stood at the far rack, hands empty, face visible. A woman in her 50s, hair pulled back, eyes exact. She held herself with a grace Lyra had only seen in surgeons and women who could pull back a bow. Without shaking, "I didn't want to come through the lobby," she said, as if apologizing for muddy boots. But the lobby looked like theater. Archer stopped in the doorway like a man entering a church he had not been in since he was happy. "Dr. Halley," he said, "we declared you dead." Lyra did not move. Her body became a small hurricane. Pointed entirely inward, her mother looked at her daughter like you look at a person you love after the world has tried to make you not recognize them. She smiled with eyes first, mouth second. "You kept the edge clean," she said, and Lyra's chest remembered lungs. The room rearranged itself to accommodate physics and family. "Mom," Lyra said, the word moving through 7 years of not using its shape. Dr. Holly stepped closer and then stopped because sometimes joy needs caution to be real. I sent the message, she said. Hello, Lyra. I wrote it into the vault the day they tried to fold you into stone. I thought, if you ever walked in breathing, and I never stopped thinking that, you deserved the list before the men did. Archer leaned a shoulder into a rack and rubbed his face like a man who had met a ghost and liked her. You could have told me. Dr. Holly looked at him, kind and merciless. You signed a paper you had to sign. I didn't ask you to go to war with men who count rivers like coins. I asked you to keep your people dry. You did. Buzzcut made a noise that meant he would be telling this story to future trainees until they thought legacy meant miracles. Lyra let one breath become two and two become three. She closed the distance and let her mother's hands find her shoulders. They were the same hands that had taught her that a sharp edge is mercy. They were shaking now in relief. We have work, Lyra said, because even reunions need chores. Dr. Holly nodded. They're going to call. They're going to say words like partnership and modernization. Smile. Then make them print their names. They went back to operations together and stood shoulder to shoulder in a room that had been built to hold less truth than it now contained. Archer watched them like a man who had walked out into a storm and found land. The county returned. The feds called. The dam operator sent a photo of the river with a caption that said, in his way, I told you so. The courier and her sister ate bread with butter like a church. Gray's lawyer arrived smelling of air travel and outrage. He found his client in a room with 2 chairs and 1 truth. He left without his jacket. In the afternoon, when the rain remembered it had other places to be, they stood on the square. Archer read names. He didn't read them all. He read enough to make the rest run. He read the signature that had looked smug and said the name attached to it with clean diction. The deputies nodded. The camera did too. Lyra stood with her hands behind her back. The black dog leaned into her shin like a witness. They did not give She River to the daughter. At dusk, the sky broke like a shell and light came out. People walked home under a sun that made puddles think about being air. Lyra sat on the operations room steps with a wrench in her hand. She did not need and watch the wind make the flag consider a story to tell tomorrow. Archer sat beside her without asking if the seat was taken. You're not on the wall, he said quietly. We never should have put you there. You put the list where it could comfort people, she said. I lived where comfort would have killed me. He nodded. He started to say more and then didn't. He watched the black dog argue with a moth. What happens now? He asked. Lyra rolled the wrench in her palm. I help you rewrite the manual so the next river has fewer tricks. I teach the kids how to keep the lenses clean and the safeties on until mercy ends. I take apart anything with a G on it. And after that? She tipped her head toward the county line where timber made a dark line. Someone will try again. Somewhere else, we'll share the paper. We'll share the songs. He accepted this like you accept gravity. He stood. You staying? She looked at the memorial wall. The green light on the vault, the legacy trunk humming like a heart. Her mother's silhouette in the tower window, hands on hips, telling Buzzcut in 3 sentences how to make a future. Proof. For now, she said. He smiled with one side of his mouth, the side that used to laugh before it had to learn budgets. We have rooms that aren't haunted, he said. Pick one. She stood and handed him the wrench. He took it because sometimes the right thing to hold is a heavy, dumb tool. The messenger, no longer only a courier, crossed the square with her sister, and the black dog who had decided he had 2 humans now. She stopped in front of Lyra and put her hand out again, not to surrender this time, but to offer. Thank you, she said. For not opening it the right way. Lyra shook her head. Thank you for bringing it anyway. They walked to the mess hall where coffee would be bad and necessary. They planned how to move, not just today and tomorrow, but the week after the interviews were over and the cameras got bored. That night, the compound felt like a place that meant it when it said, "Safe." Lyra lay on a cot in a room with a door that shut quietly. She did not sleep yet. She sharpened the long blade of a rescue hook with the whetstone. She counted the strokes and let the count turn into prayer, not for absolution, but for readiness. She thought of the valley where they had called it a clean sweep. She thought of her father's breath sinking with a reticle, her mother's thumbs pressing a compress. She thought of water pretending to be a road dot. She thought of the first line in the notebook and the last, "Teach water to prefer better paths." Stop teaching water tricks. In the morning, before the second coffee, she and Cole walked the levee one more time. He asked her 100 questions, most of which didn't have answers and didn't need them. She corrected his strap again because habits save lives. She made him tie a knot with his eyes closed. They stopped by the north culvert. The repair crew had done their work. The plate sat proud, the burr a ghost. Cole looked at the current like it might tell him a secret if he was patient. "What do you think about when you shoot a hinge?" He asked because people who live still ask questions about killing. "I think about the tool," she said, "not the target. The tool wants to help. I encourage it." He filed that away like a rank. They returned to the square. A bus idled. Different kids this time, different drills, same rules. The black dog performed quality control on shoelaces. Dr. Hawley stood with Archer and a county engineer who had the kind of smile that knew how to do math with dirt. They waved Lyra over because the day needed her brain on a ditch's angle dot as they argued happily about slope and grief. The legacy trunk pinned once more. Buzzcut looked up, surprised, then grinned. "Old friend says the river is behaving," he called. He sent a picture of a Huron standing where Panic wanted to park. Lyra let herself smile. It didn't change her scar. It made it look earned. The phone on the wall rang, not the modern one. The one with the cloth-wrapped cord. Archer answered it and put it on speaker because theater sometimes convinces truth to put on shoes. A man's voice. The same one, tried a different costume, contrite. "You win today," he said. "Enjoy it." Lyra stepped close enough that the phone could smell the eucalyptus tin in her pocket. "This isn't a day," she said. "It's maintenance." "Do you think you can keep this up?" he asked. "Yes," she said, "because it scales." The line went dead in a way cowards. Like, without a goodbye to argue with, they went back to work. They always would. That was the point. At noon, Archer posted a memo that said the wall would remain. Not because the list was right, but because the ritual was. He added a plate under the names. Some people walked back in breathing. We made room. That night, with the base quiet and the river plotting only fish, Lyra walked alone past the locker where the rifle slept. She didn't touch it. She checked the battery she'd stacked the day before and found one a hair soft. She topped it up. Because kindness doesn't cost much if you plan. She stood in front of the vault. The light glowed green, uncomplicated. She set her palm against its cool and let the glass learn her warmth. "Before," she said, and then realized she didn't need the rest. Before was gone. After had a schedule. She turned off the mess hall coffee machine and left a note that said, in Buzzcut's handwriting because she'd made him write it, "Clean the filter or Lyra will." She laughed. Small and not lonely. At the gate, she found the courier sitting on the curb. Sister asleep on her shoulder, black dog a crescent moon. At their feet, "You're staying?" The courier asked, voice that had learned could be soft. "For now," Lyra said again, and the words weighed less. "Until we run out of whetstone," the woman nodded. "My aunt says that when you sharpen something enough, it wants to do." "Good. Your aunt is right," Lyra said. The courier looked at the dark road beyond the fence. "What if they come back?" "They will," Lyra said, "with better brochures." They sat a while and listened to a night that had nothing to apologize for. In her pocket, the eucalyptus tin bumped the notebook. The pages were full now. She would start a new one in the morning. She would title it with the name of the river Ben no one likes to fish. She would file it where legacy lives, in hands on paper, in edges kept clean. And somewhere downriver, a man with spreadsheets would try a new word for ownership and find no audience where the water had learned to prefer better paths. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.